Hey guys, so I wanted to start off taking a look at humanistic psychology by giving you a really quick overview. And I wanted to do this via video because then I can have you have some, questions to go along with instead of just listening to me talk all the time. So this issue with humanistic psychology is that we've taken a look at the trait perspective, we've taken a look at the behaviorist perspective, and we took a look at the psychoanalytic perspective with Freud, right? But this one came after all of those as psychologists began to think a little bit differently about the way psychology was working. So this one showed up kind of in the 1950s, 1960s, sort of when we got the peaceful protest kind of Vietnam era thing going on, sort of like the hippie movement time. And they had a new perspective on psychology and kind of wanted to take a look at it a little bit differently. They took a look at the psychoanalytic perspective with Freud, and they saw it as too pessimistic. Freud kind of felt like, if bad things happen to you, then, terrible neuroses would occur for you, or that all of these negative things that people do are the result of their subconscious, and there's not a whole lot of things that they can do about it. And they just thought that that wasn't really the way they wanted to think of people. And they saw the issue of behavioralism as too deterministic. They saw that behavioralism said, if that things around you occur, therefore your personality will be this way in response. And they thought it was kind of weird that behavioralism didn't really acknowledge any sort of free will or people's ability to really interact or make choices about their behavior. And they didn't really like the trait perspective because they found it sort of weird that it was just so cut and dry as far as people's traits, and didn't really look at the human perspective of that and what it was like to be a person behind these identifiers. And so these new psychologists of this new era, they were more interested in taking a look at what healthy people were doing, as opposed to looking at what was screwed up about people and finding out about personalities that way. They kind of wanted to take a look at healthy people and see if they could find, a way to define personality based on healthy things. And ways in which some of these other healthy people chase this idea of trying to be their best selves. And so there's a couple of people that were involved in this movement, and the first one that we'll take a look at and that you'll explore more in depth is Abraham Maslow. And he was interested in just studying healthy, creative people as opposed to the mentally ill. He just wanted to see what it was that caused people to have awesome personalities as opposed to what it took to have people with screwed up personalities. And he found that in these people that he was studying is this desire to self-actualize is the term that he used, and that's going to come up a bunch. And what that means is that the people that he was looking at were healthy and creative, and they all had this willingness to try to continue to always improve themselves, to always fight to become their best self. And that was the thing that they had all had in common. And people that have this desire to self-actualize, that are always fighting to be their best selves, he found were always really self-aware. They were spontaneous. They were loving. They were secure and happy with themselves. They tended to have deep relationships, and they tended to be moved by peak experiences. So they tended to be really motivated by really strong, powerful, positive experiences, and ones that, as you can see there at the bottom, that ultimately help people, in his opinion, achieve this idea of the ultimate truth. That these people would chase having these really great experiences and becoming their best selves, and that, he felt, helped them to try to get closer to this idea of the unity of all things. Because of course you'll remember he's coming out of like the 50s, 60s kind of hippie kind of thing, and that's kind of where a lot of these philosophies came from. And so, who did he study? Well, he studied, some pretty important people you'll see here. Some ones that really got, a lot of things done and are seen as really positive role models. So we have Gandhi, Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, Martin Luther King Jr., Eleanor Roosevelt. So people throughout history that did some really amazing things. And he wanted to take a look at kind of what made their personalities so awesome. And one of the things that he came up with is this idea of the hierarchy of needs, which we'll explore in a little bit. And that's this idea that in order to become this self-actualizing person, there's this whole pyramid of things that people need in their lives. Starting with very, very, very basic on the bottom, and moving all the way up to more complex, but less sort of survival needs. And he said that basically everyone that is alive is somewhere on this hierarchy of needs, because these are needs that everyone has. And as they fill the need that's kind of on the bottom, as they get like the bottom need and that's totally set, then they move up to needing the next thing. And you ultimately, he found that everybody everybody, regardless of who you are, will all get to this place where people will fight to become their best selves, but only if all of these other things were met. And this was pretty key because it took a look at both the human experience of things as well as the environment that surrounds people in trying to get a sense of what this whole personality thing was about. And then there's also Carl Rogers. So Carl Rogers is the other guy in conjunction with Maslow that is really important to humanism. And he, along with this whole hippie thing, believed that people are all essentially good, and that he also agreed that everybody is essentially good and they all want to be their best selves, but the only way that they can get that way is if they have an environment that is set up for them to be able to be successful. So he said that people are kind of like acorns, and how acorns need water, sun, and air to grow. He said that people needed genuineness, so they needed an environment of genuineness where things around them were real and trustworthy. They needed an environment of acceptance where they felt that the world around them accepted who they were and was happy with who they were. And they also needed empathy. So they needed for there to be a certain amount of people caring how they felt and being interested in understanding their experience to try to make things better for them. And so they both believed, and what's really key to humanism is this idea of self-concept. So instead of like Freud would try to explain how your personality worked, the trait perspective explained how your personality worked. Instead, humanism was really interested in trying to have people base their understanding of personality and their teachings about personality based on how people perceived themselves. And so self-concept was really important, and the way in which you view yourself is really important to humanism. And so they found that if a person had a really positive self-concept, if they felt positively about themselves, then their behavior would tend to match that they would tend to act and perceive the world positively. They'd feel like the world was safe. They'd feel like people were on their side. They'd generally be more willing to trust folks and be open to interaction. But if people feel negatively about themselves, according to humanism, if they feel negatively about themselves, then generally they will not be as trusting of the world. They'll generally feel more unhappy and dissatisfied kind of in general, and their behavior and therefore their personality would kind of match. And one of their major concepts, especially with Rogers, was this idea of conditioned positive regard. Of course, it's important how you look at yourself, but they also argued that the way in which you perceive that the world looks at you was important. And he said that it's going to be, they both said that it's really hard to achieve your best self if you are in what they called a conditioned positive regard. That means that you only perceive yourself positively based on the conditions of whether others see you as positive. So this concept of, I like you if you do this, if it's based on some kind of a condition. And the problem with that is that they said that if you're worried about if you're basing your own perception off of what others think and achieving what others need you to have, then you'll really focus too much on what others think in order to make your positive self be more what other people think you should be. And the problem is that eventually people start losing touch with what they actually want to be. So they don't really have a firm grasp on their own ideal self. And then ultimately that tended to lead to people feeling not good enough or starting to have a negative self-concept, starting to feel negatively about the world because other people, were really trying to get them to be more like things that they didn't necessarily want for themselves. And so they argued that the best way to fix this is to help yourself live in a world of unconditioned positive regard and to feel positively about yourself and to be able to chase what you feel like is for your best, your very best self. And for humanism, that was really key, is being able to identify what it is you want to be and identify where it is you are now, and then be able to work really hard to become the best that you could be.